The problem of vulgarization for poetry. Vulgarization versus divulgation. From the Hamlet. Use every man after his desert, and who should escape whipping? In the Hamlet, among other plays, we find a description of vulgarization. The vulgarization of poetry, of theatrics, of politics, is referred to as tyrannical, as even satanic, diabolical, retraceable to a certain serpent, or the serpent's counsel, poisonous word. Let us consider the problem of divulgation. How often is the term a euphemism for vulgarization? Let us be clear about this. In the modern world, this is a crucial problem for us. How so? Why? Well, we begin with the religious texts, the books, the Bible. Of course, in the Quran we have a similar problem. But the question there was whether we should translate, how we should translate, who should translate the sacred text. Why is this a problem? It is a problem because every translation, of course, exposes the text to manipulation, to rearticulation, and this process of translation can betray the original book, the original message. Now today, in historicist times, we are often told that there is no hidden message to ancient texts. Everything is on the surface. Well, obviously with Shakespeare, we have the sonnets, we have texts that are very difficult to understand, we have irony, we have metaphors, and if we want to carry that historicist point to the extreme, then we're left with saying, well, now we have technicians who will decipher the text for us, break it down, digitize it, tell us what the historical references are, and as we gather all of this information, we will understand the text as it's supposed to be understood in its times. Eternal poetry, eternal messages are dead, gone, out of the window. And so all of the tyrants from Shakespeare's plays are vindicated. Not the slave, the tyrant is vindicated. The Claudius, the various Theseus from, you name it. The tyrant is vindicated. The tyrant considers poetry as entertainment in modern terms, as pleasing the public into oblivion, not as educating the public to the life of reflection, to rise above the plane of, well, servitude to the tyrant. So now let us get back to this central issue of vulgarization. We say very often, well, if we divulge, right, divulgation, right, has the same roots as vulgar, right, the vulgum. If we spread out Shakespeare so that he is readily accessible to everyone, this is good. Nothing can be bad about that. How do we do that? Well, through diluted versions of Shakespeare. So we have an animated version, film version. We have a comics version. We have, how far do we want to go with this? An abridged version, a children's version, a Disney version, Hollywood version. And every version, of course, well, has a certain license. It modifies the original, simplifies it. Where does the process of simplification take us? Simplification can be a stepping stone, of course, toward the original. The original in its richness, in its multi-layered character. But simplification can also be a distraction, a way to flatter the public and not making any effort to grasp a certain message that may, or may not, but may be incompatible with the original message. They say, well, we don't have to worry about the original message because we have to adapt Shakespeare to our times. In other words, we have to debase Shakespeare, vulgarize Shakespeare, turn Shakespeare as a means to flatter ourselves into oblivion, into thoughtlessness. These are challenges that can be raised against the project of divulgation tout court, a divulgation that says, well, it's better to have any Shakespeare than no Shakespeare at all. Really. We have outright pornographic versions of Shakespeare, where shrew is replaced by screw, and so forth. So, where do we want to stop? Where do we draw the line between bad divulgation and good divulgation? Bad vulgarization, or simply vulgarization, if the term is still considered to be bad. Where do we draw the line? And one could say, with reason, with good reason, that the line can be drawn there where we admit that the simplified version should never replace the original. And that the original, why? Because the original then would be what it is, for the sake of disclosing a message that is relevant in all and to all ages. A message that is not to be grasped on the plane of, well, compulsion, of lack of reflection, but in the element of reflection. So that the way of speaking of Shakespeare would educate us to reflect. A simplified way of speaking. You see, the problem of Shakespeare is not the problem of a surface text, or even of a plot, but of a way of speaking. This way can be betrayed by a replica, a distorted replica. The replica could flatter us into believing that we have already grasped the meaning of Shakespeare, the message in the bottle, that we have it ready at hand, without having to reflect, without having to make an effort to follow the way of speaking of the original. You'd say, well, nobody speaks that way today. Why not? Why not? Because we are vulgar? Should we reduce Shakespeare to our plane of existence? Or should we approach Shakespeare as helping us rise to his level of existence, illuminated in the element of reflection? This is a key problem that people who appeal to unqualified divulgation fail to address. They even mock it. Why? Do all forms of divulgation help us rise to Shakespeare's level? Are they better than nothing? Or should we admit that they can, and they may also very likely tend to, distract us from the challenge of rising to Shakespeare's level? It's a challenge. It requires courage. It requires the cultivation of prudence. We don't need these when we're reading the simplified, trivialized Disney version. We can take the simplification process to the extreme where, let us say, certain expressions are cropped, modified, distorted, even the plot is turned upside down. And all we have left is a bare skeletal trace of the original, accompanied by the assurance that there's nothing more of substance to the original play than what is offered in the simplified version. This is flattering the audience into oblivion. It is not to help the audience become acquainted with Shakespeare. It is to eliminate Shakespeare, to ostracize him, to get him out of the way, to neutralize him precisely in the way Shakespeare calls us not to read Shakespeare, by neutralizing his message. This is a terrible problem we have here. We consider Shakespeare on the other shore, and then we say, well, we need to introduce Shakespeare to the audience, to our children, for instance. So we need a middleman. So here we go with the works of divulgation. We need an introduction to Shakespeare. What sort of introduction? Is it an introduction that replicates Shakespeare, that distracts us from the original by reinventing Shakespeare for us on our plane? Or is the introduction to Shakespeare a call to take Shakespeare seriously? Here we go. So, today, in historicist times, the bulk of introductions to Shakespeare tend to favor the process and feed into the process of vulgarization. Now, vulgarization is not simply freedom, because vulgarization relies on a mechanical deconstruction of the original, a digitizing, a digitalization of the original. So we have to look at all of this information, and then we put the information together, and Humpty Dumpty is back together again, right? So now we have the original, as if Shakespeare's play were a clock that you can break down into pieces and then reconstruct. And now that you have reconstructed it, now there you have it. Frankenstein's monster is as good as new. There we have it. Vulgarization and divulgation. The two today tend to be one and the same thing, alas. Divulgation, understood in classical terms, is going to involve an introduction to the challenge of reading the original. This may not be altogether glamorous. It may not appease corrupt characters, corrupt people. It may require that we make an effort. It does require that we make an effort. And without that effort, we're simply violating the original.